Welcome to Guitar Gavel, a place for people who love guitars. These are conversations with musicians, guitar enthusiasts, techs, and collectors about their guitar journey and their love of the instrument. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button, share with your friends, and be sure to sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com. Hey everybody, it's David Still and welcome to the Guitar Gavel podcast. And I have a wonderful guest. We've been hanging out for a while offline. We've been having a blast. Man, we got to get after it. We're both going to get tired and fall out here. Long days for both of us. Joining me is Robert Randall XI.
That's right.
I said, Robert, man, can I throw in the 11th? Because I'm not sure if I've met an 11th. If I have, they didn't tell me they were an 11th. I think it's kind of important. So here we are. I'm including it in the intro. Robert, so glad to have you here. And I also want to say thank you to everyone who's watching and listening. I know time is your number one asset. It's precious. We're all short on it. So thank you for hanging out and jamming with us and spending some of your quality time with Robert and myself. Robert is a guitar builder and an artist, and he certainly blends both of those. Now, some of you may say, well, don't all guitar builders blend artistry? And the answer is yes, but I think you will agree with me. Robert takes that to a different level and a different angle. So therefore, I want to make sure I include both components of Robert's talents, artistry, art in its pure form with guitars blended together. Robert, thanks for being here. I hope I did you justice there.
Oh, thank you, David. No, that was I couldn't have done that better myself. Thank you very much. That's a generous introduction. Thank you.
Man, well, it's so great to have you here. And for anyone that's watched podcasts in previous times, I normally start out because we're talking about one's guitar journey, and for some guests, that's just like their love of guitars and their playing of guitars, and whether that impact was as a professional career or as a bedroom player, just how guitars have impacted their life. And in your case, obviously you're a player too, but we're going to be talking about building. But your guitar journey, everyone's has to have a starting point. So if you don't mind, share with us what got you started playing, then what got you started. You had to tinker at some point and then build. So you go. I'm sure.
All right. So I started. I was probably about 10. And I was very fascinated with the instrument. I think I was probably fascinated with it as an object, even more than like guitar music at that time. It was just like I wanted a guitar and whatever that entailed. It was like, yeah, I want that thing. And I didn't really even think it's hard. You know, I've worked with kids before. I work with kids in the rest of my life, and I see that fixation a lot, where it's like you don't necessarily have a frame of reference for music yet, but you're like, ooh, that thing whistles at me. And so my parents got me a guitar, and I started taking lessons, and it never really stuck at that point. I didn't have a way in. I didn't have quite the right teacher. I was taking lessons at the same time with my sister, and so we'd be in a lesson together, and I'd be asking her, it's like, what time are we done yet? What time is it? And so my parents, a couple years into that, sold my guitar. And a few years later, I started volunteering teaching animation, which is the gig I have and have had for the last 23 years in summer times. And I had a very, very special mentor there, a guy named Mike. And he would bring all these instruments into the animation studio. And he was always of the opinion like animation and music are inextricably linked. You know, animation is sort of visual music, and he had lots of basses and banjos, and so I started playing bass, just noodling around, and suddenly I had this way in where I could play along with we had made silent animations at that time because this is quite a while ago. And so we'd play along live with the animations, make live music with us, you know, little 14-year-olds learning stuff, and there were drum kits and all that kind of stuff. And I got done with a summer of volunteering. I worked like 40-hour weeks for 8 weeks of that summer, and I got a whopping $240 compensation for that as a 14-year-old. and I was like, I'm going to buy a bass. That's going to be my big purchase, because I was like, I keyed into it finally. It was this amazing thing where it's like, I can play this and I can kind of improvise and figure things out. Mm-hmm. And I went down looking, and even then, $240 did not get you much of a bass. And so I'd been looking and riding my skateboard downtown to look for things and coming up with nothing. And that same mentor called me and checked in on the journey, because he was, he had flesh in the game at that point, and it was like, Robert, I hear you've been wanting to buy a bass. And I was like, yeah, I haven't found anything. It was like, well, how much money do you have? And I go, well, I got $240. And he goes, that's perfect. That's perfect, because that's a factor of 12. He was only being paid in factors of 12. He was an odd guy. And he's like, I'll sell you my Fender bass for $240, which was, he had gotten it at a pawn shop in the 80s for somewhere around there, but it was worth a lot more than that. It was like a late 70s Fender jazz bass. And so he sold that to me, and, off to the races at that point. And a funny thing is, he was the same guy. The next year, he had a broken little mini guitar. It was called a Stuntman. It's sort of a BC Rich looking thing, but tiny, like a maybe 20-inch scale, electric beat, pointy, bright silver sparkle thing that his son had stepped on, and so the headstock had broken. And he gave it to me. He was like, well, you're a tinkerer and you like these instruments. Like, see if you can fix this broken guitar. So it's all like repair, building, all that stuff are all sort of linked up in this one kind of creative process, and instruments in general in that way. Yeah.
So you repaired the headstock then?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that, okay. All right. So hold that thought.
Yeah.
How long was it before you repaired or tinkered on the next guitar? Was it pretty much right after, or was it another couple years into the journey?
Well, the next thing that actually happened is after doing the headstock, I was like, immediately with the Fender bass, I took it apart.
Okay.
It's like, you got to look inside and how those electronics, it's so mysterious. And you look inside and you're like, that's it. There's so little in there. And it's like, and you start looking at, especially with a Fender, you see how it's put together, and it's not that big of a thing. It's like, I started going, well, I could make one of these. And so just a couple years later, I was making a bass first, and then guitars, and figuring all that stuff out. And doing more like setup work. I didn't do any real hard repairs until a little bit later, but lots of like tinkering and wanting to change and customize things.
All right. So I've recently started practicing soldering. Okay. Yeah. So like, when you started tinkering, I mean, you're taking pickups out, or what? Like, I'm curious, like, did you get a solder gun, kind of went at it? I mean, yeah. Or you already had one? I mean,
I'm lucky because my grandpa was an engineer and was a woodworker. My dad's an actor and stuff, but still a very, fixing things was very emphasized and important in my, it's like, it was very much part of being thrifty and self-reliant. We were very much a fix-it kind of family. Yeah. And so I had one of those terrible soldering guns, the ones they have sort of a thing, it lights up and you pull a little trigger, and it leaves a big disgusting lump of solder wherever you're doing that. So I have lots of examples of me learning how solder was, how to do all that stuff. That's a real art form for sure. The people who do that cleanly, it's like I still struggle because there are people that do it so beautifully, all those right angles and.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it is. Just recently had a conversation with someone who solders professionally. I mean, that's not all they do all day, but a friend of mine, Wyatt, is an amp and guitar tech and a pedal builder, and an amp builder now at this point too. And you got to watch what you say around those guys. You know what I mean? Because it's real. It's serious. I mean, I get it. It's serious, but it is amazing. So it's like, I mean, you're just trying to get this guitar to work, and open up one of theirs, and it's beautiful. Yeah. So, all right. So that kind of takes us into your middle teens, 16, 17. Mm-hmm. Like this point, I mean, you're generally speaking, probably feeling more and more comfortable with what you're doing, right? I mean, and now it's somewhere in there, you really take the bull by the horns, I'm assuming, or into your early 20s. When did you, why don't we, maybe we fast forward, or we're not fast forwarding too far. Like, I'm going to build one and sell it. Maybe that's the next question in your journey. When was that? Do you recall?
Well, it was a bit of a journey. Like it's, I never went to school for any kind of. I never had a guy train me or worked in a shop or anything, any of those normal avenues that seemed like the standard ways people get into this sort of thing. So it's just autodidactic, and because of that, and because of my personality in general, I'm a pretty slow learner. So it was a lot of stabbing and making sort of guitar shaped objects and sort of challenging. I had to prove things in my own head for years. It's like, why don't people do it this way? And then you do it and you go, oh, that's why. And so there are a bunch of early guitars that would not cut the mustard, something I would not, put up to sell to somebody. And it's not really till I'm out of college and in the house that I'm in, where I have a dedicated space, and I actually had a couple opportunities. I used to work for this puppet company in town, and me and my working partner at the time got a grant to make a puppet show with Metro here, all using recycled objects. And it was all puppet show with recycled puppets and all made of trash. That was all about conservancy, recycling, all that kind of stuff. And I made a guitar I still use. I'm using it at work this week, even, that's made out of sort of stuff I found at this local recyclers called Scrap in town. So the neck was like a poplar like post you'd put a mailbox on.
Yeah.
And all the inlays are buttons, and the body is made out of sort of like, I always say it's not like a cigar box. It's like a fancy Monopoly tin. If you got like a deluxe Monopoly, it's that sort of big steel sort of thing. And I found at a local guitar shop, I found a pickup that was the cheapest pickup they had. It had a sticker that said $6 on it, that's still on it, just because I was like, I love that it was $6. And I made that, and that one came together so easily and beautifully that I was like, you know what, I can make these things from scratch, and it took the pressure off of it to make something really beautiful, and it just became this fun process. And that's after that, all the guitars I made started to be, I took it more seriously, I suppose. And I was like, this is something I can do. And I started making guitars more focused towards like, I want to show these to people. I want to get these in other people's hands too, and see what, get their reactions. And that's where it sort of really took off.
And I neglected a big part of the story, or neglected to ask. And I introduced you as an artist too, and a guitar builder. Can you, in terms of what someone may see as more traditional art, any formal training there? I mean, clearly you have, it sounds like you come from a do-it-yourself family, a resourceful family. Your dad's an actor, so a creative family. So you've got all of this like in your DNA. So maybe the art component is, started when you were 4. I don't know. I don't want to leave that off the table. So I'm not asking the question maybe the best way, but can you kind of
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Because it's very important.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's very, very creative, very lucky, creatively supported person. My parents would always say, don't choose a life in the arts, because they had been through, it's rough, but there are worse ways to make a living for sure. And so as I was going through high school, it was clear it's like traditional academics were not working for me, and I went the art school path. And I went to a small art school up in Seattle called Cornish, and I actually got into Cornish with a guitar I had made out of a walnut log that this farm kid I went to high school with he was like he knew I was looking for wood, and he was like, we just cut down a walnut tree. Do you want some rounds? I paid him $50 and got 2 big rounds of walnut, and we took him home in my dad's 77 Mercury, because I had a huge trunk, and we got an Alaska sawmill. It was just a fun, supported project, because my dad, once I started getting excited, he was just excited to, like, let's go down this journey. He didn't know what he was doing either, but he was like, this is fun, kids into something, and so we milled that wood and made stuff, and I took that to my college entry and showed it, and the man who did my admissions was a guitar player too, and saw that and was like, well, this kid's getting in. And then that whole time, though, I didn't do much woodworking or anything like that. I was mostly focused on painting and photography and actually video installation art stuff. I still photograph, but stuff that's not really part of me. But it was nice to come in at guitar making from that different angle. Like, I have definitely more of a art history foundation of the way I look at the history of guitar making, and the history, looking at them as objects of art, also as in addition to them being tools, and that's still my approach. I really like, more so than making like the perfect copy of a Fender or a Gibson, which is a great pursuit to do too, but there are so many people that do that so much better than I ever could. I want it to have a story that's particular to me, and just like a fine artist would have, it's as much about your process going through it, and hopefully there's beauty reflected in the object that you've made that adds to its functionality.
I think this is a great point. I know you've got a few guitars around you.
Yeah.
But will you grab one, whichever one? And we're going to look at a few, so don't feel like we've only, it's the only one we're going to look at. And give us kind of talk us through how you found how you sourced the material, what you did through the like, give us tell us your artistic journey through it all, so that'll resonate.
Most definitely. All right. So,
and I'm going to make you full screen, by the way. So,
okay.
Yes.
So here's one. This one's a good one to start, or in that sort of off of what I was talking about, because this is definitely one that has more of a historical sort of slant. I got a book years ago. I started getting interested in the history of viol making, so that pre-Amati schools of violin making, where they're making bowed there's an instrument called the viola da gamba, which is a fretted sort of cello looking kind of instrument from mostly the Renaissance, and that are just incredibly ornately ornamented. That's sort of redundant, but they'll often have a figurehead on the headstock and interesting shapes, and just a little bit more the violin world so regimented and straight, and there are variations within this, but there seemed like a lot of room for interpretation. So I made this this guitar, which I call a guitarra da gamba, because it has its inspiration from different viols that I saw. So it's got, I'll show you up there, it's got a little baby goat on the headstock here, and sort of vaguely violin inspired. It's sort of like if a guitar maker saw, which is what happened, if a guitar maker saw a few of these in a book and was like, I can make that, and sort of half remembered. And they'll often have these sort of striped backs. And so I put together, this one is fir and blue pine. And this fir is actually the legs of my grandpa's old workbench. So this is my own personal guitar, and I don't think this will ever go out of my hands for that sort of reason. And it has a redwood top. We're really lucky in town. We've got this great resource here in Portland called the Rebuilding Center, where when they're tearing down old buildings, old schools and stuff like that, a lot of those materials get reclaimed into the Rebuilding Center. And I went in, I used to like to go, I would buy my coffee for the week and go walk around the Rebuilding Center and see what had come in. And one day I came in and they were unloading all this redwood, all these pieces of redwood that looked like barn siding or something like that, perfectly quarter sawn. Some of it was flamed, and they were boards that were probably about 15 feet long, about say about 12, 14 inches wide. Like this amazing stuff. And as soon they hadn't even unloaded it, there were still straps around. I was like, how much is those? How much are those? And I snatched all that up. And that tends to be like, I try as much as possible to work with local reclaimed wood. Of course, there are exceptions here, but I try not to ship, or not be responsible for shipping logs from far away tropical places. So this neck is also a similar sort of. These were pulled out of school here in town, and it's all old growth flamed fir. And the wild thing about this old fir, like Portland's built out of Doug fir, and we had these amazing trees here, and we're all slow growing, and people have the association with Doug fir quite often, and rightly so, that it's sort of pulpy, punky, construction wood. But that old growth stuff is incredibly dense and incredibly stiff. And I've made a bunch of guitars with the neck out of that fir. And I just like using it. I like that it's inherent to the place that I'm making the thing. And maple neck or maple fretboard. This beetle kill blue pine. We built a whole at my parents' house. We did all this paneling inside this garage that me and my brother-in-law all did. And we had all this blue pine that they cut down for beetle infestation here. And I try to sneak that wood into, I think all these guitars that I've built have a little bit of blue pine, just partially because we have so much of it, and partially because I think it's, it's absolutely beautiful. And I like the story of it. I like that you see all these little spots and stuff that the Beatles made with their disgusting living inside of the wood. And there's more of that blue pine here on the back, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's that one. And it's got sort of a violin style bridge I carved, and this kind of tailpiece that viols have. But beyond that, it's just a nice sounding acoustic or electric arch top. This one has a Benedetto pickup because of this great sounding pickup. But I didn't want it to say. I love Bob Benedetto is a huge inspiration for me. His guitar making tapes were unlocked so many ideas for me, and but I still wasn't happy having his name across the guitar, so I made a special little burled redwood cover for it right here, just to make it a little bit more bespoke, have the illusion that it's something it's not. But yeah, this is a great guitar. When I made this one, I was like, I think I got something here. This is a rival other guitars that I had. Yeah.
Did you carve the top?
Yeah. It's a carved top. It looks like it's very, very thick, but it's sort of the whole thing is sort of routed up in, and it's hard to explain exactly. But yeah, it's a carved top. Yeah, and a hollow body. It has a bit of an acoustic voice. It's pretty thin, so it's not like a great big thing. But the more and more I build, the more I really like there to be some kind of air chamber in an electric guitar. That's at least my own taste. I'll make solid bodies too, but for things for me, I like there to be that thing that an air chamber gives it.
All right, grab one more, but when you come back, I'm going to ask some questions that are not specifically related to the next build or that build.
Oh, sure. Let's see. What's a good contrast to that? Oh, well, this is like the complete opposite. Here we go. This is a guitar. I've been thinking about these for a while, and this is a guitar. I started collecting odd pickups. I love old Japanese guitars, as I think anyone who starts to play a few of them, you go, oh, there's something special, especially about these pickups. And so I collect these pickups. I also collect a bunch of old Soviet pickups and things like that. And I wanted to make a mashup guitar where I took a bunch of odd, unmatched pickups and slammed them together into one thing. And that's what this is. And so we've got like sort of a Gaiatone kind of thing, and a Taisco kind of thing, and another, I think probably Kent Gaiatone kind of pickup here. And they all have their own individual on-off switches,
Nice.
which is really cool because these are all out of phase from each other. When you get this neck and this bridge together, you get a very bizarre, wonderful out of phase thing that I could have never produced. If I had gone in and gotten pickups wound, I would have never gotten this result. And it has some really cool details. It's got a poplar neck like you would have on an old Harmony or something like that. But I found this really dark bluish kind of piece of poplar. It's also got
that is really dark for poplar.
Yeah. And that I found and whenever I see this dark poplar, I'm like, ooh, I gotta scoop that up. It's so cool looking. And it's got what is the body? The body is like basswood, I think. But I wanted to try this thing. I've seen guitars. There are these old Soviet metal guitars that have a very brutalist kind of like, they're almost shaped like a K, like the letter. And apparently I've heard they sound awful, but they have a hammer tone finish, sort of like a what do you call that? When you a powder coat kind of finish like you would see on a camping thermos. And I was like, ooh, I really like that look. And I actually found an old Regal parlor guitar that has this sort of finish to us, and that I was inspired for. And so I wanted to spray, hammer tone, and which turned out to be one of the hard. It was like, they advertised that those rattle can finishes like the easiest one coat finish you've ever tried, and this was something else trying to get this. So it was consistently hammered all the way through, but it came out really, really beautifully. I don't know if you can even see the details of it a little bit. The headstocks particularly, if it gets in there, there we go. And but you get that kind of idea, and it gives that vibe. And it's got a maple fingerboard that I dyed gray because I thought that would match the thing, and pick guard that I made that I thought it would look cool if I kept covered in this green canvas duck. And I made this little control plate and old radio knobs here as the knobs. Yeah, and I found these little dip switches which come white, but I was like, we'll make them sort of bright. I saw there was a Porsche Gamund, like the early Porsches have these primary color like white and then primary colored buttons on the dash. And I was like, that's a cool look. And so I was sort of inspired by that, but also sort of like a Nintendo or a Famicom controller. It's a melange of things where I'm like thinking about those things as I start to design these kind of instruments.
Okay, is that one for sale, or is that one of your personal? Is that in your personal collection?
I haven't listed this one up yet. I've had a couple people sort of vaguely interested. I haven't put it up yet, but things are for sale within reason. I'm slow sometimes to let them go. Sure. And because I like to, I like to play them and experience them a little bit too. But yeah, for sure, this is one that's for sale.
I want to ask about some of your tools of the trade. Mm-hmm. And look, I'm not a luthier, and I'm a terrible woodworker. So I'll be ignorantly asking questions. So, but I am curious, and I think I'm not the only one that's in this boat, that's wood challenged. What give me kind of the rundown of some of the tools that you use to shape and sculpt and to cut. I really am curious.
Sure. It's definitely, it's for sure an evolving thing, as I sell instruments and repair and get different kinds of jobs, your shop gets more and more developed. And as you think through a process, you'll try something one way and you'll be like, man, I could jig this out and save a bunch of time. Or if I had this one tool, it would make this a lot easier. So it's been an ever evolving thing, but I try to use a combination of hand tools and some light power tools, and a lot. Almost when I'm carving necks and doing that kind of stuff, it's pretty analog. It's pretty much saws and planes and chisels. I've gotten sort of fast with that. And that's sort of also the fun part. Was like, as a young person, I'd watch videos of people making guitars, because that's mostly how I learned, is from the internet. And it, or watching Bob Benedetto carve a top, and you watch him use a plane. It's just like, ooh, that there's some sort of ASMR-y kind of like, ooh, that looks like it feels good just drawing those tools. And it does. Lo and behold, it feels great. So, but there's a limit to that. And there are certain times where you're like, yeah, I could spend a lot of time and have sore hands, and or I could route this out. So I use a router, and a router is a complete necessity, and a few jigs for that router, table saws. I just got a new bandsaw, and actually the tool that's proved to be indispensable in this last year since I got it, saved so much time, is a thickness sander. I got a thickness sander from a harp maker not too far from here up in Washington, and that's been like something, because that's one of the most frustrating process. Thicknessing, especially plates for acoustics by hand, is with a plane. It's like you have to have your sharpening game on point, and if there's any runs or anything in the grain, you'll have some heartbreaking fail. You ruin a piece of wood that you've been working on for a long time. So that's been a wonderful lifesaver. But it's a fine line of, because you wanna it's fun working with hand tools, and it makes you feel good. So you want to pick and choose those good points for that. I could never like fully automate it, I don't think,
Sure.
like with a CNC.
Well, I mean, you talked about the build. There's the journey in the build, and that the journey is part of the artistry and the art, the final product, and then it lives in that final product. So, not throwing anyone under the bus, that's CNC. They're still make beautiful work, but to you, that is the experience of it is in the final product, and that's what's important.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like there's no wrong way to do it, and if you're trying to get to a certain point, and the CNC gets you there and leaves you unfrustrated by it, or if you have production and you got a bunch of orders and you got to fill, it's like that makes sense to me. But there is this thing for me in experiencing them as objects in that very, rarefied sort of hoity-toity way of looking at it. There's something I heard John Hodgman call the aura of the authentic, where it's even if, say, you hand make one thing and a machine makes another thing and they're outwardly identical, part of me romantically wants to at least believe that the handmade object has some other energy, or at least you tell yourself, and certainly it does. And it does for the person who made that, which may be enough. It's like, it's because there's intention in there. And I love in all, whether it's movies or music or any kind of art form, I'm most bewitched by getting those glimpses into that person's personality who's making that art. And so that's just what makes me feel good. So that's my philosophical approach to it, I guess.
Man, I love that, and I totally believe it. One thing that attracts me to guitars, you use it. I mean, a new off the factory line is great, and not that I don't want that, but with a used guitar, there's a heart and a soul to it. It didn't start that way. It started if we're talking about factory guitars, it started just, for sale in a store, or just started as a piece of wood, and then it went through a machine. Certainly people touched it, but it's the stories and the life and the soul that was given to it from all the players, or from the owners, or from maybe just the one owner, and that you're giving a part of your heart and soul into the instrument, even presenting it as new, but it already has a heart and soul. Whereas a new off the showroom floor, it's not there yet. It will get it, but it's not there. Yours, when you're done, it has a piece of you. And so I completely understand what you're saying. Not being a builder or an artist, but I'm picking up what you're putting down, and that's what I love about about used guitars, man.
No, totally. Like some makers, some really great, like this is not a slag on them or anything, but they're of the opinion, and this is an interesting opinion. It's like if I'm making a guitar for somebody, it should be like their privilege to break it in. Like it shouldn't after we put those strings on and make sure that it works and it's not going to blow itself apart and all those things. Like you stop touching it, you put it in a case and you ship it to whoever is paid for it. But for me, it's like, I don't know, that kind of feels like it's mine. That's it's sort of like if you get into cooking, because it's like, well, I get all those little chef bits that are for me, and it's like I feel that like my fundamental creative impulse, and I hope it stays like this at least partially throughout my life building these things, is that it's like I'm following ideas and passions and new things that it's like I'm excited about, and it's like, ooh, I'm gonna make this thing because I want to try it like this, and that's an exciting that's an ever refilling well of joy. It's like you're thinking about this thing, you've spent months making it, and then you put those strings on, and then you just get a bask in either disappointment or like total ecstatic joy. Sometimes it just completely blows your mind, and that you look down at it and you get to strum it, and it's like, I did it, man. I made it happen.
That would be me with nothing pretty, but it works.
Yeah.
I am curious. You talked about kind of time to build, and dare I ask, like the last guitar. By the way, did the last guitar you held up, that creation, does it have a name?
Oh, what do I call it? I end up calling it the Japanese pickup man. I'm sort of like, I'm bad. I'm bad at, some of them have names, but I'm pretty bad at it. They're very utilitarian names, like what this thing is usually. But that's it.
So curious, dare I ask how much time? I know it varies per bill, but I mean, what are we looking at? Weeks, months and months, or weeks and weeks and weeks?
It's I build so much different stuff that that it's like I'm right now I'm working on, it's not here right now, but I'm working on I've become this weird specialist, and I've only made one of them, but that's enough for me to be the guy who makes these. Is I make copies of Orville Gibson instruments, that the original founder of Gibson made these wonderful, completely eccentric carved top guitars. Yes. And a few years ago, I endeavored, it's like, I'm going to reverse engineer one of these. And I made one a few years ago, and it sold immediately, because it's like, as far as I know, I'm the only one making them as close to, I still take some liberties, but as close to the originals as possible. And so I'm working on one right now, and it is beyond time consuming. It's like it's a ridiculous expenditure of time, because they're made in this very Baroque, 19th century, we don't have TVs kind of mentality. And so that one's taking months and months and months, and I'm working during it. So but I try also to make, I sort of make a few classes of things just for my own thing, where I'll make these sort of fancy things that I'll work on for months, and then I'll get to the end of the year, and I want to make, I'll like use up scraps and things I do, and I'll set challenges for myself. I'll be like, can I make 4 guitars this month? Or 4 stringed instruments is more accurate, because I'll make dulcimers and banjo-y type things. And can I make them as inexpensively as is practically possible for someone that's building in the sort of style I want? Because it's sort of, you tell people you're a guitar maker, and then you show them, they're like, oh, wow, you're selling instruments, and they have an idea of a price point of, normal guitars, which are under $1,000 certainly. And for most people that are like buying guitars, and they're just normal people with normal jobs, they're looking for something that's like under 500, which is, I've done that, and that's nearly for friends and stuff where it's like I may be losing money on this thing, but my heart wants to be able to. It's like, wouldn't it be great if I could give someone a handmade thing, and if I could figure out a way to make it economically feasible? And the way to do that is like, how can I make this as pragmatic as possible in its process? And how can I keep the materials as inexpensive as possible with still making it a functional thing that's worth worth what it is? And so yeah, so those ones will come together, and I'll be like head down, focused. I'm going to make a bunch of instruments all at once. I'm going to batch them out so I can do a lot of operations at once. And I mean, the biggest batch I ever do is 4, so it's not like insane, but yeah. And so those ones will go quick. And it's a funny thing. It's like the ones that are not so tortured, sometimes those are the ones that really blow your socks off. It's like, wow. I made a couple of very simple, a box guitar in particular, where it just came together. Nothing went wrong. Everything was easy. The way I built it was as simple as you could build something. I strung it up, and I was like, this is one of the best sounding ones I've made, and certainly one of the most fun to play ones. So that's such a enlightening. I'm very glad I try that, because it's like it resets you and goes, oh, okay. There's you can get very into yourself, like it's like, I'm gonna put all this decoration, I'm gonna put all this binding, all this inlay, all this stuff, and but when it comes down to it, is that making it better? I don't know. Sometimes, but not always.
Well, do you have one handy that has another one with interesting or fascinating inlays? Because I would like to ask about inlays if you have an example. I know I'm throwing you under the bus here. We didn't prep any of this. It's like,
yeah,
I'm going to show off some guitars.
I'm working on a bass right now that's going to have more of this style thing. This is the thing I sort of got away from because because it was hard, and but I used to do another hobby of mine or woodworking pursuit is I do this process called marquetry, where you take veneers and make sort of little pictures with them. And that's on a few. I didn't need to grab this to show this, but that's on. You can see on this fretboard, I have some very odd inlays on this older guitar. This one has ambrosia maple back, so I put a little ambrosia beetle as the first fret inlay here, and that's all that marquetry sort of cut out pictures. I got another example here that's actually better and more contemporary. This guitar has a little aloe plant that I made in that same sort of marquetry style, and this one actually has sort of interesting inlays because these are made out of resin. I started, and this rosette is also made out of resin, which is something. Sometimes I'm a little hesitant because there's there are these trends to make these tables and guitars that aren't quite my style with big resin rivers, and I'm always like, oh, all that plastic going in the river. But for little accents, the cool thing about it is I can take epoxy and I can dye it with non-woodworking kind of colors and stuff. Like I'll use acrylic paint and watercolor and that kind of stuff, and I can get colors that you'd never get out of the palette you get out of the woodworking shop, and you can really feel like you're doing something that's more bespoke and a little bit more artistic. And so that's the direction I've been going in more recently, trying to go for these colors that are a bit more me and not traditional sort of ways of doing inlay. That and the marquetry.
That's a handsome guitar. What? Okay, so like builder question 101. Installing a fret marker on the fretboard or fingerboard. How do you do that? So I'm just I mean, I know I can watch a video on this, but I mean, how do you do that? How do you get that little hole so you can put a plug in there?
Oh, it's pretty simple. That's a pretty simple one. I mean, the thing that kills you on that is layout. Like it's like you got to have your ducks in a row, and you got to measure twice and make sure all your lines are there and your machines are set up. And once you've done that, it's a pretty simple operation. The tool I use for that more often than not now is a Forstner bit, which is a kind of drill bit that takes, it has a sort of a spur and takes out a perfect plug rather than it being tapered like an average drill bit, which is sort of triangular at the bottom. Like that does not leave a good surface to glue to. And so you use a Forstner that leaves a flat thing and a little divot, and so then you have a void, and hopefully that void is the right size, either for a piece of pearl stock or dowel, or with resin it's easy because you're just slathering it in there, which is part of the appeal of it. But yeah, it's the real hard part is making sure, number one, you've put it on the right fret. I've made that mistake. I'll tell you a story. I have a guitar in the other room there that I list as my 2016 to 2022 guitar because I had all these false starts with it. And the main first false start, the thing that was the most heartbreaking about it, was I had this beautiful bloodwood fingerboard, and it takes a long time to surface bloodwood. It's hard, and so to get it radiused is a big pain. And I decided I was going to inlay agates into it, little stones and all sort of thing, and which took weeks to because it's like you're grinding stone with a Dremel down to that thing very slowly, and then grinding it, and it came out absolutely beautifully. I left the stones sort of these natural organic shapes, and then I got ready to lay it out on the neck I had prepared, and I'm counting down to do my layout, and I realized that I had inlaid my double fret marker where would normally be the 12th fret on 11. And it happened when I had been doing the layout. It's like, because I would I'd trace the stone on the piece of fingerboard, and then I'd move it up to solidify the trace. And in that moving and shaking, I'd forgotten to count. And so I keep that fretboard above my workbench as sort of this, because I had friends that were like, you should cut those out and inlay them in a new guitar or something. And I was like, no, this is the most important lesson I have in my workshop. It's like, and it's still beautiful for me to enjoy, but it's like, okay, Robert, slow down, make sure everything's right before you cut into these things and expend a bunch of work.
So that I could easily see myself doing that. You only do it once.
That's right. Yeah, I've not made that mistake again.
All right, going back to the inlays again. Okay, so if we're not doing a dot style fret marker,
sure,
but it's something much more ornate and intricate, or let's just take like a factory guitar that has a parallel inlay or a cloud inlay, cutting the design into the fretboard and then putting your art in there.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's tricky. It's a tricky process. I do it. There are several ways. I do it with a Dremel. It's a mixture of a Dremel with a sort of a router base. You get these from various suppliers have these aftermarket router bases, because the router that you get with a Dremel is plastic chintzy trash that doesn't work. Honestly, a Dremel's kind of plastic chintzy trash that I'm always cursing, but it's still what I use. And but you're able to, with very fine, I get these very nice bits from Stumac that are extra sharp and small, and you just hog out that material by hand, follow a line very, very carefully. And then when there's a corner or point, it's pretty easy. Once you've set a depth, matching that depth with razors and chisels is pretty easy once you need to fill out those details. And actually more and more now, I'll do more of the edges by hand just to get those tight things. If you look at like old Gibsons, or especially like old Regals that have split parallelograms or any of those sort of things, and you look at the detail of how those were done, those guys were, they were just, there's so much fill and so much, and even in really nice hand, like I'll see old DeQuistos and stuff that do not have the tightest inlay, and you could tell that like they were trying to get guitars out of the door. Mine's not always perfect, but I do try for my own, pride and edification to have it as tight as you can, especially because I tend to use sort of lighter fretboards. I don't use ebony and rosewood that much. And so you have a little bit less room to slop, dark filler in there. And so I try as much as possible to keep it tight.
Yeah. So good for you. I would just stop at circles. Yeah, it's funny. I was wrote about a guitar and our lovely Washburn. The reintroduction of Washburn guitars was in the late 1970s. So the brand came out 1898, late 1800s, and had a number of ownership changes and then kind of disappeared. I can't remember what decade it disappeared. And then it came back in the late 70s, just somebody wanted to revive it, and they did. I believe it was a couple. Nonetheless, their reintroduction to art, and it was actually their first solid body electric guitar, 1977, 78, the Washburn Wings series, the Falcon, the Eagle.
Yeah.
So the Eagle and maybe a couple of others. The Eagle was the highest end of the series, or the body shape was all the same through those. They had like 7 or 8 different bird named, avian nomenclature, but they use brass rings as the fret markers. I think that's super cool. I don't have one. I think that's super cool. You got to do it. Do it on one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's so I've seen a few people do those. Yeah. It's almost like that. There's a guy that works in the Fender custom shop that is I think he's a Russian guy or Romania, or I should. He's from somewhere in Eastern Europe, and he's particularly skilled at that sort of silver wire work, where you cut a very thin channel and do that. And he does those, that kind of, and that's so classy and elegant. I love the way that looks, where you have the same wood sort of contiguously in the middle of that, in the beautiful little fine detail line. That stuff, that kind of stuff where it's like, it looks like it's less of a thing, but when you look at it and you start to think about how somebody did it, it's like, oh no, that was a much harder process to make this subtle thing. And it's like that really gets me going. I like that kind of stuff a lot.
Well, do you have one more guitar we can take a look at, or do we
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Here's this is a particularly weird one, so I'll show it off. I have a guitarist friend here in town, whose wife is a cello player. They've got a duo together, and they were looking for what do you call them? They call them baritone tenors now. Like Eastman, I think, is making these baritone tenors, where like you have a normal tenor guitar which is tuned. Oh shoot! Now I gotta remember, but like a viola, so it's whatever it is, C, and then fifths all the way down. And that's a normal tenor guitar, which is 23 inches long as far as the scale goes. And now they're making these baritone tenors, which are more in the cello range, right, an octave down from that, and closer to a cello scale length. I think this one is 26, and you get that big cello range. And so he was wondering about a double neck that had both. And we were talking over the pandemic because we were striking up a phone conversation to keep ourselves sane, and we just talk guitars. And he brought up this idea of doing a double neck electric tenor, baritone tenor, and tenor. And I was like, that is such a cool idea. And so I got to drawing right away, and I came up with this, because I did design it out of whole cloth. It's like, how do I make this work and make it a typical Robert Randall kind of instrument? And this is what I came up with. And he had a guide. He was maybe gonna commission. We're friends, so it was like make it if you want, and maybe I'll buy it, but if you do make it, keep it towards the cheap end. So I made it all out of stuff I had around. So it's got really cool. The sides are made out of this of more of that blue pine, but all laminated together. It looks particularly cool at the end there. And I'd gotten a bunch of reject walnut from a guitar maker in town that ended up putting those rejects at one of our woodworking store that you could buy by the pound. So I got a bunch of this old walnut. And then this top is reclaimed, more Doug fir, but very twisty grained Doug fir. And then there was a cabinet shop closing down, and I got a bunch of walnut and maple. And so these are two walnut necks with maple headstocks. I use that luthier, as Malinowski calls the luthier joint, where you have the scarf go under the fretboard like this, and you get this really cool effect. And particularly when you have contrasting wood like this, and I made a little dart, all that kind of stuff. And this thing is a ton of fun. I had these pickups wound by a guy. I think he calls himself Fear No Beard, and he makes more stuff for like cigar box guitars, because that's a big subculture, you know. And I was like, can you make because there are not a lot of options for this kind of spacing tenor guitar pickups, you know. There's lots of bass stuff, but then you get the only options you have for this sort of stuff would either be like a lipstick or like a little Fender style thing, which is not the style of this. So I had to wind these up. I've got little thumb wheels as the controls. I made these more of those switches like I have in the last guitar, but I had to build these standoffs, you know, to make it all line up. It was very much a prototypey kind of thing. But I love its whole vibe. It's got such a friendly, odd look, and so it's one of my favorites of these more recent things that I've built.
And did your friend appreciate the build when it was finished?
He did very much. He did very much. He bought another one of my guitars just shortly after that, and him and his wife, when they got married, I gifted them for their wedding another tenor. So they're all stocked up, and I was like, and then after I built this, I was like, I kind of like this thing. I'm gonna keep it around, but. And it was like I didn't even build it with the idea that it would necessarily go to them as much as like it was just a cool idea that we both wanted to see happen, you know. And what a relief, you know. It's nice to have space to make stuff for that kind, just totally on spec of like, well, what will happen if I do this? Will it work? And it opened up all kinds of ideas for further development, especially it's like I definitely want to make more of these cello length things, electric baritone tenors as time goes on. I have this as sort of a template now.
What have you ended up keeping a lot of the ones you've built that you maybe didn't intend to? I know there's certainly ones that you build for yourself, and then there's ones that you have made for the intention of selling, letting the world share them. And have there been many of those where you're like, I'm going to keep this one?
That's. I mean, I got there's a real guitar problem here. I have a lot of old guitars too, and so this house is overrun with instruments, and so. As it gets fuller, it's easier to let them go. But yes, there are certain ones where it's like you make it, and a lot of I'll get commissions, but a lot of my building is on spec, and just because I'm following whatever ideas I have. And sometimes when you build something on spec, you're like, well, it's not necessarily it's for me, but it's certainly for the right person out. You know, it's like some of these I don't feel totally comfortable just putting them out to any old person, because it's like I kind of want to know where this one ends up or that one ends up, and then out of necessity, like, you know, you'll list one up and it'll get snatched up, and it's always a good experience when they go out the door, just about. And so, but yes, it's hard to say goodbye sometimes.
Hey man, you're not the only one in the world that has a hard time saying goodbye to guitars, whether you made it or it's one you bought. It's okay. So
Thank
you're
you.
in good
Makes me
company.
feel better, David.
You're in good company. Great company. Man, I feel like there's so much left to unpack, but maybe we're at a good wrapping point. I don't know. Do you have like kind of any parting thoughts? I could ask like, what's next? Is it kind of just continuing the journey, or are you being methodical and you're like, yes, I have a plan for maybe what's next?
Oh, well, yeah. I have a stack of designs. And a whole bunch. I think most guitar makers are this way, where it's like, yeah, you have tons of things you'd like to do, but right now it's just about getting more instruments into more people's hands, getting that. There's nothing better. I'm a guitarist, but I'm not a great guitarist, and when you put one of your instruments into somebody's hands that really knows how to play and can really give you feedback on what works for them, like that is so invaluable and information I do not have. So that's the thing. It's like I'm just want to get more of these instruments into more people's hands, get their feedback, just sit in front of them, listen to them play them even, and just keep spreading that guitar love. It's like, it's such a beautiful thing to do, and it's such an inherently social thing to do, even though we're sort of alone in our basements working on them. But the great result is somebody's going to make social music with this, and so it's just being more and more in that part of it as time goes on.
As I hear you, I think about what I derive from a guitar that you like, and it's joy. So you're delivering joy to someone with your creation, and like not many people in this world get to have that as their product. Like,
For sure.
You get to have that as your product.
No, it's pretty special. It's like, it's one of those jobs, job is the wrong word for it. It's one of those like callings or disciplines that, yeah, you feel it's a tremendous amount of work and not profit, but the what you reap from that is so special, especially if you love music and you love instruments. Like, what better way to spend your time than to work on these things you love and develop them and hopefully come up with something, be some little part in the evolution of whatever, a single idea or a track in that, or people look at your thing and be like, well, that's not the way to go. That's, great, fantastic. I figured it out for you.
And people can find your work, your home-based website, rsrandall.com.
That's
correct?
it. That's it.
And then from there, they can link to some different places. And I'm going to include all those links individually in the show notes so people can just click right away and go to it. I think we're at a wrap, man. What do you think? Awesome. Love it. Robert, thank you, brother, for your time, man. This is really, really a fun, wonderful, beautiful conversation, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. This is so fun. I love talking guitars. So anytime.
Awesome. All right, well, we'll do it again. This was part one, everybody. We got to come back when we've got 10 more new ones to talk about.
For sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. Hang on tight. Everyone, thank you for watching or listening this far in. Again, all the links to find Robert's work are in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, for watching and listening. Thanks, everyone. Come back and hang out with us again. Look for the next one. Take care, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Guitar Gavel podcast, and a special thanks to Steve Kuykendall for composing this music and being such the great guy and friend that you are. As a reminder, hit the subscribe button and sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com.